Hello, my name is Elizabeth. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm really glad you're here because I read Return to the Black Farm by Elias Witherow. Now, I did one of these videos on The Black Farm, which is the first book in the series, and I got a bunch of requests to cover the sequel, and that's what this is. Now, for this video, I do suggest you get a blanket, maybe some snacks, a beverage, and really settle in because this one will not be short. Okay, so trigger warnings for Return to the Black Farm are the same as the Black Farm. And while we're on that subject, if you haven't watched the first video, which I will link below, or you haven't read the first book, The Black Farm, then I highly suggest you go either read The Black Farm or watch the first video and then come and watch this one, because I'm not going to explain anything that happens in the first book. I'm going to just move ahead, assuming that everybody already knows everything that happened in the first book. So just so you know that. This story centers around people who self-exit and where they go after they die. And it contains all kinds of horrors: grotesque monsters, terrible torture, horrific acts of cruelty and violence, sadistic characters, extreme grief. And this story, this version, the only additional warning I have is that this time there's a child on the Black Farm, a small female child. Yes, it is horrifying. So, on that lovely note, if you're interested in hearing the whole story, join me for the ride. Okay, first of all, this is not the story of how Nick and Jess live happily ever after, because from the title, we know we are going back to the Black Farm, which is awful and terrifying. But when the story begins, Nick and Jess are living their happily ever after. They're married. They have a son, Theo. He just turned 1. Nick is plagued with nightmares. He tells us that Jess takes sleeping pills, so when she goes to sleep, she never remembers her dreams. She's basically like dead to the world. But Nick often wakes up with a racing heart and fear in his eyes. He's seeing a therapist, but he isn't really able to open up. I mean, how can he tell her what he's really been through? She'll have him committed. We do get to witness a little bit of the third session they have, and they do a word association kind of game, right? And at one point, the therapist says farm. And Nick is instantly pulled out of this, back and forth, and says, why in the world would you use that word? Like, why that word specifically? And the therapist says, well, I'm looking back in my notes and I see that during the first session, you were telling me about where you lived, that you lived more in the country than in the city. And I had asked, well, do you work on a farm? And your response had been, not in a million years. So on his way home, he stops for a drink, to take the edge off. A single woman at the bar tries to pick him up, but he rebuffs her. He tells her he is in love with his wife and leaves after only one drink. Nick and Jess, as I mentioned earlier, have moved out of the city and they're now living in a much more rural area. When he goes home, Jess is finishing up dinner for the 3 of them, and she's singing along to a song on, probably her MP3 player, and or whatever she's listening to on, and she sings like 2 or 3 stanzas without her realizing that he's there. And it's really cute because, she's like, oh, you've been standing there, and he's like, long enough to know that you're, I'm not going to lose you to a singing career. It's just really cute. It shows how in love they are. And then he grabs Theo and he just sort of like loves on him, and just does all those wonderful things that you can do with a little 1-year-old, and the 1-year-old is giggling and he's saying dada, and it's a beautiful scene. It definitely, Nick has some guilt. Well, is it guilt? I promise we'll get to that. So at least he has some kind of PTSD from their time on the farm, but he's doing his best to get through it, right? That is until he has a dream that is a little too real. He's back on the farm. He's looking out over the black water, and the pig's palace is in ruins behind it, and something hisses at him. You did this. There is a group of pigborn coming towards him, and he yells, "Leave me alone." But the response that he gets is, "We can't." He wakes shaken and apologizes to Jess, but she's not focused on him. Not at all. She is listening intently. He asks her what's up, and she says, "There is someone in our kitchen." He tells her to go be with Theo, and he will check it out. In the kitchen, there is a tall figure standing at the sink. And when Nick enters the kitchen, the man says, "Hello, Nick." He tells Nick that he does not need to use the kitchen knife he's holding, as he is not here to hurt him or his family. He introduces himself as Ramiel. Nick asks what Ramiel is doing in his home, and he gets the horrifying response, "I'm here to bring you back." Ramiel then explains that when Nick fed the pig with a belly full of angel flesh, he poisoned the pig. The effects weren't felt fully for a time, but after the pig exploded the sun from the sky, he was able to escape from his barn and is now missing. Not only is he not in his barn, he's not on the island. They think he's trying to figure out a way to get off of the farm, and a creature of that power being given access to Earth it can't happen. It just cannot happen. There's still time, Ramiel says, to go back and stop the pig from expelling the toxins, keeping it stuck on the farm. And Nick is the one who has to go back and fix it. But why? Why Nick? Because Nick is the one who broke it. It was Nick who poisoned it. It was Nick that caused everything. And since the eyes of the world and God have no ability to affect things on the farm, the plan is to send Nick back to find the pig, return it to its barn so that it can continue its rule over the black farm, and everything will go back to the way that it was. Ramiel tells Nick utter chaos has erupted on the farm, and this is the only way. Nick refuses to go. Can you blame him? I certainly don't. He says he fed the pig, he got out. There is no way he is going back. Ramiel pleads with him, "Please do not make me use your family against you. They haven't been hurt. Don't make me hurt them." But Nick can't hear the truth in those statements. All he can think is, "I can never go back there." And he stands by his refusal. And Ramiel leaves. Nick explains to Jess what just happened. She's just as upset as Nick and says a lot of the same things. But we got out, we fed the pig, we're back, we shouldn't have to go back. He explains that he refused, and that if Ramiel shows up again, they'll deal with it. They spend that Saturday together as a family and then head off to sleep. When Nick wakes up, Jess is not in bed next to him. When he checks Theo's room, it is also empty. He races downstairs to find his wife and child in the kitchen. Jess is naked at the kitchen table. 2 crude spikes have been pierced through her hands, keeping her attached to the table. Her flesh is bloody, and her eyes hang half open with pain, and her mouth is drooling, and her face is blackened and a ruined mess. The creature that stands next to her is horrifying. It has no skin, stands over 7 feet tall, has a horse-like head, but it has horns that curl back behind its head and nearly to the ground. The real horror hits Nick when he sees what's on the kitchen table. His son is naked, and there is a spike sticking out of the child's chest right where his heart is. The spike is going into the table, holding the child in place. And when Nick sees this, he begins to scream. That is when a second creature, much like the first, grabs a hold of Nick and does not let him go. Meanwhile, the other creature grabs one of Theo's little legs, tears it from his body. Jess screams, and the creature shoves the small limb into Jess's mouth and down her throat. She fights and vomits, but the creature puts his whole arm into her mouth and down her throat so that the limb will reach her stomach. When it's done, Jess's jaw is broken and her face hangs at an unnatural angle. The creature goes back to Theo, tears off his head, and then shoves that down Jess's mouth and breaks her teeth. She can't breathe. Nick screams, "Stop it!" The horse creature holding him whispers, "Go outside," and drops him to the floor. When Nick looks up, the scene in the kitchen is gone. No creatures, no Jess, no Theo. He races upstairs and sees that Jess is sleeping peacefully, and Theo is as well. He returns to the first floor, opens the front door, still trying to understand what it was that just happened, and then he sees a man standing in the street who begins to walk towards him. It's Ramiel. Nick questions what happened, and Ramiel tells him that if he does not return to the farm within 24 hours from now, what he just witnessed will actually happen. He can't force Nick to return to the farm, free will and all, but if he does not return, his wife and child will be destroyed as he just witnessed. Ramiel explains that he won't do it, but that the other two creatures have been told they can do as they please if Nick is not back on the farm within 24 hours. Ramiel explains that there's always a choice, but Nick protests that this is no kind of choice. Nick explains he barely made it out last time. There isn't enough of him left to make it out a second time. Ramiel tells him that if Nick is able to get the pig back, then Ramiel himself will get him and return him back home to his family. And finally, Nick realizes he has no options. He has to go back to the farm. He weakly asks Ramiel, how? How am I supposed to fix the farm? He's told that the pigborn have been whispering about the Mudman. Ramiel doesn't know who the Mudman is, but he must be important as his name is being repeated over and over. Ramiel says if Nick can find the Mudman, then he will be able to help. Ramiel also tells him that he should find Danny. Now, if you remember, Danny is the one who is the right hand of the pig, and he was the one who did Nick's orientation, where he gave him the offer of you feed the pig or you stay here thing. Nick protests that Danny hates him, but Ramiel says that things have changed. Since the pig disappeared, the pigborn have turned against Danny and taken him as prisoner. If Nick can free Danny, he will repay the debt by helping Nick find and bring back the pig. Ramiel then tells Nick he is done talking. Nick has a choice to make, and if he does not return to the farm, he knows what will happen to his family. Nick begs him not to do this, but Ramiel simply winks out of existence with a blue light crackle. Nick walks back into his house with feet of lead. Should he tell Jess? No, he can't do that. Should he leave a note? Should he take one last look at his son? No, if he does that, he won't go through with it, and he knows that if he doesn't, he'll spend the rest of his life wishing he had. He begins to think about the things that he left on the farm. The barn, the pigborn, the rain, the needle fields, the black ocean, the keepers, the temple, the cult that he burned to the ground. Peter, the man he killed to save Jess, the one who said he would find Nick and return the favor. Nick gets himself to the medicine cabinet, takes the bottle of pills that Jess uses to sleep without screaming, pours them out onto the coffee table, and wonders at the feeling of deja vu. He takes the pills and begins to die again. The act of dying is just as painful and upsetting as it was the first time. Nick feels himself fall apart and then begin to take shape again. The first thing he feels is the rain, then the cold, and the gloom, and finally he gets his eyes open. And there it is, the Black Farm. The mountain is now a broken collapse of rock and dirt. The space where the dead sun used to be is now a massive black hole. He sees the ocean and is reminded of his harrowing experience trying to cross the black ocean and scans the horizon looking for keepers. None were to be seen at that moment, but Nick knows they are there somewhere patrolling the endless expanse of black water. Nick finally realizes he's out in the open and starts to head towards the forest to find cover. He's only thinking of finding Danny, and after a few minutes decides to head towards the barn. After walking so long, his feet hurt. There is so much of this story that is just transversing, just walking endlessly or running very quickly, but we'll get to that. But there is going to be a great deal of traveling for very long amounts of time. And this is the first one. Okay, so he's walking, right? And he hears a noise and he looks through the trees to see three figures walking towards him. It doesn't take long to him to figure out that they're all pig-born. They're mutilated masses of snouts on human-like faces, too much skin, and a conglomeration of fingers and hooves at the ends of the limbs. He hides himself away the best he can because the party will be passing him about 10 yards away. As they get closer, he can see that they are dragging something behind them. It's a human man with no clothing and massive lacerations on his body, already turning to infection. The man is connected to the chain dragging him by a hook through his lower jaw. When they pass by, Nick catches the man's eye and realizes he's still alive. And Nick is rooted in the spot for quite a while. The realization that he is actually back on the black farm and the amount of pain and violence that can be brought down on him in this wretched place becomes all too real. When Nick reaches what he figured is about halfway through the forest, he hears another noise. He whirls around and sees a group of at least 12 unalivers. They ask him if he knows where he is, and he says he does, but quickly decides that telling this group he's back for the second go would be a very bad idea. He tells them that he ran into someone else a little bit ago who explained the place. He was told to look for Danny. Do these people know where he can find Danny? The group tells him that they're headed that way as well, and he should join them. But Nick gets sort of a bad feeling and tells them he's going to go on alone by himself. But they circle him. Then they attack, shove him to the ground, get his arms behind his back, and put a gag in his mouth. The leader of this little group tells the rest that they can add Nick to the other two and that the three of them should be enough for a trade. The group continues on their way with Nick in tow. Then Nick feels a rumbling beneath his feet, and one of the group says, "A keeper." In response to that, a question is posed. Is it Berserker? The group agrees that the keeper is moving too slowly to be Berserker, and that the keeper is not headed towards them. They talk about how the rules have changed since the pig destroyed the dead sun, and now the keepers are roaming wherever they want, not just in the ocean. Nick wonders at this new information and wants to know what Berserker is, but he doesn't. The group makes it out the other side of the forest, and they discuss the plan to get their leader back. They will see if trading these three prisoners will get them what they want. As they approach the large group of pigborn, Nick can feel them wanting to tear this little group of unalivers apart, but they're cautious due to their number. The group leader addresses them. He says to them, "We have 3 unalivers to give to you in exchange for one you already have." They describe a man, strong with a scar along his neck, and the pigborn responds with, "We kill you, we take, we win." The leader of the little group is not at all surprised by this response. He tells the pigborn that he knows absolutely they can do that. But with the amount of unalivers they have, they might actually be able to take a few of the pigborn out. When the unalivers die, they come back to life. And they can come back stronger with more people to attack again. The pigborn no longer have the pig, so their end will truly be an end. Then their leader of the group tells them that if the pigborn do kill the group will come back, but this time they will lure Berserker with them, and everyone knows that Berserker will decimate the pigborn. The pigborn mutter and grunt and growl among themselves, finally saying, "Go, get the scarred man." As the released prisoner gets closer and closer to Nick, he finally realizes who it is. It's Peter. Peter from the cult of the hooves of the pig. Peter was the one that Nick manipulated to save Jess. Nick had killed Peter, and Peter had vowed to never stop hunting for Nick. As they pass each other, the men are shocked at each other's presence. Peter promises that he has not stopped searching for Nick, and he will find and destroy him. All Nick can think to say is, "Where's Danny?" Peter is puzzled by the question, but the swap has been made, and Nick is taken by the pigborn along with the other two traded for Peter. As Nick gets taken into the pigborn, he hears talk in whispers and shouts of the pits. He sees that there are massive holes in the ground, dug up circles about 10 feet deep and twice as long across. Inside the pits, he can see that there's 2 or 3 people in each, and they're fighting. No, that's not accurate. They are not fighting. They are killing each other. And that's when Nick realizes that this is where they are taking him, to a pit, to kill. His mind whirls with the reality he's facing, and he starts to whisper, no, I cannot do this again. But a word is said into his ear just before they push him into the pit, and the word is kill. 2 other unalivers are tossed into the same pit with Nick, a large man and a woman of what Nick says is indeterminate age. He tries to explain that they don't have to kill each other. They're on the same side. But as the woman advances, he can tell there is no talking her out of her current goal. She gets a couple of hits in, and then he tries to gain control over her by grabbing her wrists. She responds with a knee to the groin. He falls to the ground in agony, and she takes the opportunity to try and claw his eyes out. Nick has curled himself into a ball and realizes she's gonna get to his eyes if he doesn't do something, so he tries to elbow her side, but he only gets a passing glance. He's trying to convince himself to ignore whatever pain he is in and start fighting, when all of a sudden, she's no longer on top of him. The third person in the pit has a hold of her and is literally squeezing the life out of her. He then slams her onto the ground face first, follows that by stomping down hard on her neck. And Nick can hear her back break. The poor woman is not dead. So the man pushes her face into the mud and holds it there until she does, in fact, die. Then the large man's attention turns to Nick. Nick manages to dodge the first blow. His hands fall to the mud of the floor of the pit, and an idea forms. The next time the man tries to strike Nick, instead of dodging it, Nick throws a handful of mud and earth into the big man's face, and specifically his eyes. As they tumble to the ground, the big man's hands are trying to make contact with Nick, but he's punching blind. Nick gets a hold of the big man's face and hears his inner voice say, "Do it." And so he plunges his thumbs into the man's eyes until they both pop. Nick follows that up with a hammer of punches into the big man's face, eventually wrapping his hands around the man's neck and not letting go until the pigborn are pulling Nick off of the man's corpse. Then Nick is pulled from the pit and directed into a sort of house. Once inside, he sees that it's a cage, and he begins to scream. Memories of being captured the first time around, memories of what Muck had done to him, run through his head. He screams that he won. He should be let free. But the pigborn just laugh and throw him in the cage. Nick cannot control his fear and rage and continues to scream until he hears a voice behind him say, "Yelling won't do you any good." And that's when the other person steps into the small amount of light in the cage, and Nick sees it's Danny. Danny realizes it's Nick at the same moment and, of course, begins to attack. "Do you have any idea the hell that you left me in after you poisoned the pig? Do you?" There's a flurry of screaming and fighting and attacking, and Nick tries to respond, I know, I'm here to set things right." And when Danny finally hears those words, they stop him in his tracks. Nick explains that he's here to fix it, that the pig is sick, and he has to get it back to the barn. And then he says something Danny never expected to hear from Nick. "I need your help." At first, Danny can't understand how Nick is back on the farm. I mean, why in the world does he care about putting things right? When it occurs to him, Nick must have been threatened with some kind of ungodly hell to be back here. Nick tells him it doesn't matter what he was threatened with. What matters is getting the pig back to the barn and setting things right again. At first, Danny is pleased at the idea of the hell that Nick has gone through and will go through, but Nick reminds Danny that he is also in a terrible place. That if he wants things to go back as they were, he needs to help Nick. Danny tells Nick it's probably not possible, and Danny goes on to explain what happened after Nick and Jess got off the farm. He explains that the pig started to die. At least that's what Danny thinks. And then things just started happening. For instance, at one point, the entire island goes pitch black for a while. Then the sky would turn this eerie dark red, which would then be followed by more rain and gray and back again. The pigborn would spontaneously explode with no warning. Then the pig went completely still. It did nothing for days. It didn't even breathe. When it finally returned to its natural state, it began to vomit. Gallons upon gallons spread across the farm, and as it did, the pig began to shrink, fall apart, and start to rot away. Then Danny tells Nick that when the pig blew up the sun, one of the keepers got in the way of the blast and was destroyed. And that was when the rest of the keepers abandoned the ocean. Sometimes they wander over land aimlessly, sometimes they destroy everything in their path. There's no predicting. Then Danny says that one of the keepers is different. And Nick says he's heard of Berserker. Danny assures him that Berserker will annihilate anything and everything in its path. After that overload of information, Nick quietly asks Danny if he thinks that they can actually put things right. Danny doesn't know. Then Nick asks if he knows where the pig is, and Danny does have an answer to that one. The answer is the other side of the ocean. Now, if you remember from the first book, the ocean is not transversible. Nick and Jess only survive past trying to cross the ocean because Nick is able to kill them both so that they can be reborn and not be captured by a keeper and hung on its cross. Nick tries to get more information out of Danny, but Danny's gone silent. They sit in the small hut listening to the rainfall. Eventually, they hear Big Pigborn coming toward their hut. They're dragged out of the cage, and they are taken to a clearing. There are other unalivers there, broken and bruised and bloody, but at the center of the clearing is an unaliver who has been hammered into the ground. When Nick asks what this is, Danny tells him that if you refuse to fight, if you just let yourself die, they find you, they bring you back here, and they make you an example to the other unalivers of what will happen if you don't fight in the pits. An extra large pigborn approaches the prone man with a sledgehammer, and Nick thinks, this is going to be bad. When Nick closes his eyes, a pigborn from behind him hits him across the head and demands that he watch. Danny whispers that if he doesn't watch, he'll be sorry. So Nick watches. The pigborn with the sledgehammer approaches the prone man to the sound of pigborn chanting, break, 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 break. The hammer comes down first onto one of the man's knees, then the other knee, then his shins, his feet, and finally his arms turn. The man's screams turn from fear to horror to pain and back again. And finally, after what seems like an immense amount of time, the hammer finds the man's skull and the pigborn erupt in cheers. Nick feels sick and chides himself for thinking, better him than me. Then the pigborn begin to quiet, which is not something they do often, and a sound becomes apparent. A rumbling, deep sound. A sound that's clearly a keeper. Wait a minute. It's not just a keeper. It's Berserker. Berserker is so large, his shoulders seem to scrape the sky. The humans hanging off the massive cross around his neck are in such agony, and everyone in the area is just watching, waiting to see what this massive evil giant is going to do. The pigborn having, at least for the moment, forgotten about the unalivers. And then the giant stone monster turns towards them, makes a terrifying noise, and begins to sprint in their direction. The last thing Nick is able to ask and get an answer to is what is about to happen. Danny's response is, a lot of us are going to die. Now, how can I accurately describe this scene? Okay, first, however big you're picturing Berserker, make him bigger. Now, however fast you've made him, make him faster. Danny grabs Nick and yells, run. Nick gets pushed along with all the other fleeing creatures, unalivers and pigborn scattering every which way to try to get away from this colossal creature made of stone. Nick looks back and sees that it's already reached the beach and is only a handful of miles away now. The footfalls of the Goliath are like bombs exploding. Danny yells to Nick not to look, to just run as the thing is advancing towards them way too quickly. Despite the warning, Nick looks back again and sees Berserker reach some of the pits and the huts, which he destroys simply by running through. Wood, glass, flesh, bone are all thrown into the air as everything is decimated in the Keeper's wake. Nick watches as it backhands 3 pigborns at once, and they each explode from the impact, sending gore out from the impact in an arc of red. Nick and Danny are already pushing their bodies beyond their limit, but the scene behind them motivates them to keep pushing. Danny yells that the Keeper is heading their way. When Nick looks back, he sees that one of Berserker's massive hands is heading towards him, and Nick just barely gets out of the way, but the impact of the massive limb onto the ground throws Nick airborne. When he lands, the wind is completely knocked out of him, and he lays there on the ground, just trying to force oxygen into his lungs. We all know what that feels like, right? When he looks back towards the monster, he sees that it has turned and headed back towards the pits. He tells himself to get up and get to the trees before the thing comes back to finish him off, but before he can even try, Danny is there, helping him up and moving them both toward the trees. They reached the tree line and continued into the forest for a few minutes, but Nick's vision begins to fade, and he tells Danny he can't go any further. Danny protests, saying, "No, we're too close to the tree line still." Nick asks Danny why he helped him, and the last thing Nick hears before blacking out is Danny's answer. "Hell if I know." When Nick finally regains consciousness, Danny pushes him to get moving right away, but Nick needs a minute. He asks Danny if he's seen anyone while Nick was out, and Danny tells him that there was a small group that went past, but Danny stayed hidden. He wasn't sure if they were just unalivers or part of that group. Danny explains that the group that had traded Nick to the pigborn to get Peter back was an organized group that felt there was safety in numbers. They were formed out of the people left behind after Nick destroyed the cult. You know, the hooves of the pig. They no longer have their temple, the pigborn have taken that over, but their numbers have grown. And Danny says that they are almost as bad as the pigborn themselves. He tells Nick he would never join them no matter what protection they might be able to offer. Nick asks Danny why he's so hateful of the unalivers when he's clearly one himself, but Danny rebuffs the question and demands that they get moving. The two agree that if they see any of this group, they will avoid them at all costs. Danny then asks who it was that came to get Nick. He wants to know which side came to get Nick, and Nick tells him that it was someone named Ramiel. Danny says it figures it would have been heaven, since they're all cowardly bastards. Nick pushes Danny to say where he thinks the pig is gone. He had said something about a cross on the other side of the ocean, but the ocean can't be crossed. And Danny agrees. The ocean cannot be crossed, but there's another way. They can go under. There's a tunnel. The tunnel leads to an abyss, but what the pig needs is past the abyss on the other island. Nick asks if this has anything to do with the Mudman, and Danny's surprised that Nick knows that name. He tells Danny Ramiel said that there were whispers and that the Mudman could help them bring the world back to rights. Nick continues to pepper Danny with questions until Danny asks what the hell happened to him. He used to be a punch first, ask questions after, if at all, kind of guy, and now he wants to have a full discussion before taking a single step. Nick says he's different. And Danny says, we'll find the old Nick, because that's the one that we need to actually make it out of the Black Farm. Danny insists that he knows that the pig has gone to the other island. But Nick wants to know how he can be so sure. So Danny explains how he first began his service to the pig. So Danny explains that when he first began his service to the pig, he had to connect to it somehow so that he could understand what it was that the pig wanted and needed. To do so, he had to eat a part of the pig, which caused a sort of psychic link. He describes the messages he gets from the pig as a kind of flavor. It's not words, it's not pictures, it's the flavor of what it is he needs or wants. So, yes, Danny knows where the pig is because he can sense it faintly. He explains that he probably has more information about the Black Farm than he is supposed to because when they linked, they sort of spilled into each other. Danny never said anything, fearing he wasn't supposed to know the things that spilled into him. Finally, Nick acquiesces. They head towards the tunnel entrance, which is on the other side of the mountain that is no longer there. The two men walk in the dark and the rain for a very long time. They trudge forward, one foot in front of the other, for an expansive amount of time. Finally, the temple of the cults that Danny had said was now inhabited by Pigborn appears on the distance. Danny tells Nick that they need to go to the other side of the temple, but not to the temple. Nick hopes that they don't run into any Pigborn, and then says that in spite of everything, he's still glad he destroyed the temple. While looking into the distance, he sees a flash of blue light across the sky and wonders if Ramiel is watching his progress. They reach the other side of the mountain and Danny stops. He gestures ahead and Nick sees a tunnel. Is that it? Danny says no, but it is a tunnel and we don't want to run into Pigborn. So the men start to discuss giving the tunnel entrance a wide berth until they hear a sound. Screaming. That's screaming. Oh no. That sounds like a child screaming. And Nick cannot ignore the sound. He tells Danny he has to see what's going on and he needs Danny to have his back. Danny protests, but follows. Inside the cave, he sees two shirtless men standing with their backs to the tunnel entrance, standing in front of a fire. Against the wall, tied up to the wall, with her arms stretched above her head, is a little girl no more than 4 years old. She's wearing a dirty white dress. One man has an axe, and he's holding the blunt edge up to the girl's crotch. The other man slaps her when she screams. They tell her that she's going to make a wonderful little pet as soon as she learns how to follow rules. They laugh at her fear, tell her, "We haven't even taken your clothes off yet," and Nick's blood begins to boil. He crosses the space between him and the man with the axe in 4 long strides. Before the man is even aware that Nick is there, he has been thrown into the fire. Nick pushes him deeper into the fire and begins to stomp on his face. It's the 8th blow that caves in his skull. The man's companion is shocked and terrified, and he begins to mutter, "You didn't have to do that. We weren't really going to hurt her. I mean, you can have her." Nick loses it at the sound of those words. I can have her? She's a human child. He picks up the axe and attacks the second man. Once he's also dead, Nick wipes as much of the blood off of his hands and face as he can and goes over to the girl. He unties her and tells her that he will not let anything bad happen to her ever again. She hesitates for a moment and then jumps into his arms and begins to sob. Nick picks her up. She feels like nothing because of the death grip she has on his neck. If you've ever held a kid who's got a hold of you and you could just like let go and they're still there, that's clearly what's happening. He tells her that she's safe and he will keep her safe. But Danny starts to protest. They can't take her with them. But Nick is not going to debate this. The girl will stay with him. She whispers to Nick, "Please don't leave me alone." And that's it. Nick is going to take care of her and he's going to protect her. And that's the end of the story. He's going to take care of her. There is nothing anyone, especially Danny, can do to change his mind. Okay. So a little moment of interpretation. This is me. Nick is definitely different this time around. He's different because he's a father. The violence that he couldn't bring himself to do, the weakness that Danny sees in him, is gone now that there's a child to protect. Nick still thinks to himself, what have I done after he kills someone? But there's no questioning what he will do to protect this girl. He will do whatever it takes, just like last time when he did anything and everything to get Jess safely back home. This little girl will be just as protected, maybe even more so. Danny is right. Nick is different. Nick now has Theo, and being a father has changed him. Okay. Back to the story. As they head out of the cave, Nick picks up the axe and marvels at how familiar it feels in his hand. If you recall, that was his weapon of choice the first time he was in the Black Farm, on the Black Farm. The three of them continue on their way, Nick holding the little girl whose head is now resting on his shoulder. Nanny says it's just over the next ridge. The little girl asks where they're going, and Nick tells her a very bad place. Then he asks her name. She responds, Emily, but my mom calls me Em. Nick introduces himself and asks if the two of them can be friends now. Danny cannot stand what is happening. He tells Emily, 1, she has no friends. 2, she's dead. And 3, she is never leaving this place. Also, what those men did to her is going to happen over and over and over again forever. Nick screams at Danny, and Danny reminds him that they are trying to keep a low profile. Nick tells Emily he will never leave her, that Danny is grumpy and not to listen to him, and Emily says that Danny is mean. Nick agrees. They hear a noise and look up at the mountain that is no longer a mountain and see a lone figure heading towards them. Determining it's a man and not a pigborn, they wait to meet him. As the man approaches them, smiling, he has a large, crudely made spear in his arm, and as he comes closer, Nick realizes who this is. It's Pudge. Remember Pudge? Pudge was the man who killed the young pigborn at the very beginning of Nick's first visit in the farm, and then later on, they reconnected and climbed up the mountain towards the eyes of the world together. That was until Nick stole Pudge's gun and shot him in the face with it. Oops. They introduce themselves. Nick calls himself Jack, and Pudge wonders if they've met before, but Nick says he's only been on the farm for a short time, and Pudge agrees he has a very generic face. Pudge explains that he loves to kill the pigborn, but that even that can get old after a long time, and he's been spending his time over here because of the crazy things that are coming out of the tunnel. Danny and Nick jump on that information. Where is the tunnel now? Pudge is not sure he wants to tell them. First, it's no place for a child. Emily then calls Nick, and Pudge looks at him funny. Nick says, oh, she's just really young and confused. There was another companion earlier. His name was Nick. Pudge asks Emily if these men are being nice to her. He isn't reassured when she says yes. He tells them that he will take them to the tunnel entrance, and then says, but his condition is that he will be going with them to make sure that they don't have anything untoward planned for Emily. Finally, they reach the entrance. Pudge takes 2 makeshift torches out of his bag and hands one to Danny. Nick puts Emily down, and she grabs his hand. Pudge then warns them that things are funny in the tunnel, that they won't understand most of what they see down there, and they will be walking across the seams of the Black Forest, and things get pretty kooky there. They should keep moving forward no matter what, and not talk to or listen to anything down there. After the warning, the 4 of them head into the tunnel. Emily tells Nick that she can walk, that she knows that walking will make her very strong. Her mommy told her that. Nick tells her that it sounds like her mommy was very smart. Emily agrees, but says she's sad a lot too. That she had vitamins that she ate when she was sad, but they didn't really seem to help. Nick then gently asks if Emily ever ate any of the vitamins. Emily's response is, I'm sorry. I know I'm not supposed to. Nick tells her she's a good kid, and Pudge tells them to keep down the chatter. So that's how Emily got to the Black Farm, which is so beyond messed up. How could a child be sent to a place like the Black Farm? It's supposed to punish those who take their own lives, but she didn't know what she was doing. She didn't knowingly take her own life. She thought she was taking vitamins to make herself feel better. Why in the world would she need to suffer an eternity on the Black Farm? It is so distressing. Continuing on with the story, the party sees a faint light up ahead. Pudge tells them it's the first drop. Pudge continues along at a quick pace, but Nick doesn't follow because Emily has dropped his hand. He looks back and sees that she is now behind Danny, looking at the tunnel wall. Do you see something bad? Nick asks, and Emily nods. It was you. Danny races ahead towards Pudge, who is quickly disappearing into the darkness of the tunnel. Nick grabs Emily's hand and they catch up to Pudge, who admonishes them for moving too slowly. They explain that Emily saw something and Pudge agrees that he's sure she did. He also reminds them that he told them not to look at or focus on anything. They have reached the first drop, which is a very narrow tunnel down, and Danny freaks. He cannot go into something that small, but Pudge tells him he doesn't want to go back. Didn't Emily say she saw something back there? Yeah, no, you don't want to go back that way. We need to keep moving forward. There's a makeshift ladder in the tunnel that the party can use to descend, what Pudge is calling the first drop. Nick is the last one to head down the tunnel, and when he looks back up at the opening, he sees something looking down at them. He tries not to think about what it could be. They make it down the hole and continue on. The tunnel has what feels like cracks in the walls where faint red light is like emanating. If Nick looks too long, he starts to get dizzy and feel like funny, so he focuses on Danny's back or Pudge's torch. There are other tunnels sneaking past them, and Nick tries not to look down them, but Danny is looking everywhere and asking, "Do you see that? Did you see that? Did you oh my God, did you see?" It's very unnerving. Nick was trying not to look, but Danny's words get stuck in his head, and he saw that in each tunnel they didn't take was a lone human-like figure watching. It's unnerving. Nick tries to focus on Pudge. He tells Danny not to look at them, but the further they walk, the more Nick gets the feeling like they're trespassing and that they are not welcome. Suddenly, Pudge takes a turn down one of the side tunnels, and it makes Nick feel really uneasy. He knows he has to trust Pudge. That's their only move at this point, but he doesn't like it. The passage begins to grow shorter and narrow as they continue. A couple of times, Nick even has to turn to the side to get through the passageway. Then the ceiling is so low that they have to crouch. Eventually, the men are crawling on their hands and knees. Nick says he feels like a piece of meat traveling through an intestine. There's a visceral description for you. As they push their way through the ever-tightening space, they begin to hear a noise. Something is following them. Something is chasing them. Something is coming. From up ahead, they hear Pudge yell, "We made it out. I'm out. Just a little further." At first, Danny thinks he might be stuck, but Nick yells, "If Pudge's fat ass could get through, then so can you, Danny." Then Nick feels something touching his feet, and he kicks at it wildly. Finally, he pushes his way into a small cavern with the rest of the traveling party, yells that there's something behind me, and they all turn to watch. See nothing. Nick insists he felt something, and then two extremely white hands emerge from the hole, stretch into the cavern, and begin feeling around the floor of the space. Pudge jumps into action, yelling, "Everybody get out of the way!" Before Pudge can advance, the rest of the creature slithers out of the hole and into the cavern. It's described as a 4-foot-tall ant-like creature with a gaping slit in the middle of its body in which a human seems to be held. Pudge tries to attack the thing with his spear, and then Nick goes after it with his axe. The thing gets atop of Nick and almost manages to poison Nick with its large stinger when Pudge manages to spear it again and yell to Nick to finish it off. And the thing finally dies. After, Danny asks Pudge, what the hell? He thought Pudge was an expert at killing these things, but Pudge tells him he's never seen anything like that before. And he also can't hide the fact that he enjoyed killing something new. Danny reminds him that they need Pudge, but Pudge looks directly at Nick and says, "Right. I wouldn't want to screw over you nice people now, would I?" Nick feels the dread that Pudge remembers exactly who he is. They continue down until Pudge stops and listens. Do you hear that? There's a heavy breathing coming from below them. Pudge says that they have to stop and wait. They should take the time to rest. That the thing that is below them will hopefully not notice them and move on eventually, and then they can continue on their way. Pudge and Emily both fall asleep pretty quickly. Danny and Nick begin to talk. And here's where we get Danny's story. He's on the farm because, quote, "I didn't kill my father." He explains that his father was a monster. He made life hell for Danny and his mother. But his mother was a saint. She made a promise to God to stay with this man no matter the situation, and so she did. Danny was able to run away in his mid-teen years and always hoped he would be able to go back and save his mom. But when he finally got the courage, his father had already killed her. It wasn't long after his mother's death that he self-exited. When he got to the farm, he tried to feed the pig, but it spit him back out. Danny thinks he could taste his anger and didn't like the taste. So the pig uses him and his anger and gives him the position that he held pretty much since arriving on the farm. Danny asks what year it is, and is heartbroken to discover it has only been 8 years since he arrived on the Black Farm. It seems like so much longer. Nick then sleeps for a bit, and when he's woken up, Pudge tells him it's time to keep moving. And this time, when Pudge gets moving, he really gets moving. Emily needs to jog to keep up. Finally, they stop when they reach a large room with a massive hole in the middle. Danny asks Pudge to assure him that they do not need to go into this hole. And that's when Pudge attacks both Danny and Emily and throws them into the hole. He then turns to Nick and says, "Do you really think I don't know who you are? This was all a setup." Pudge doesn't care about Danny or Emily in the slightest. Then he wonders what will kill Nick. Will it be the madness? The monsters? The two fight until Nick is pushed into the black hole. The last thing he sees is Pudge's monstrous face wickedly smiling down at him as the darkness swallows him up. When Nick wakes, he's surprised that he's still alive because he's still in the tunnel, so he didn't die. And then he fears checking his body for injuries. He's banged up and he hurts, but he manages to get himself up and start looking around. There's a small stream of sorts in the middle of the tunnel. It's the same water that is in the ocean, and when he puts his hand in it, it starts to go numb, just like the black water of the ocean affected them the first time he was on the farm. There are other tunnels snaking off from the main tunnel, and most of them have some kind of shadow figure that seems to walk away just as Nick notices it. It's, again, severely unnerving. Nick starts to call for Danny and Emily, but they're not responding. He keeps walking and feels like he's being watched. He sees 3 figures and tries to hide as they walk right past him. He keeps looking. Finally, the tunnel opens up into a cavernous room with the red light scars on the walls, giving it this strange, eerie, and unsettling feeling. The shadow people are all heading into the wall of the cavern. On the other side, there is a slope leading to a peak, and Nick climbs it. At the top, he hears his name. It's Danny and Emily. Nick is so grateful to find them alive. Turns out, Danny kept Emily safe. He caught her when they fell together and has kept her close until now. He's even kind of nice, according to Emily. He landed on his side and his shoulder and his hip, but nothing was broken. Nick looks at Emily and asks if she's okay staying with Danny, and she nods. But she says she doesn't like it down here because there are strange people with icky goo all over them, and they're really scary. Making sure that Danny is able to continue on, Nick asks if he sees which way they should go, and Danny points out a rather large tunnel up ahead that has a strange orange glow. Nick wonders if it's the way out. As they begin to gather themselves and move, there is a large, deep, horrible sound that rocks the cave they're in. They almost feel like it's an earthquake. They start to head for the tunnel, and the sound comes again, but this time it doesn't stop. They look back into the huge cavern, and they watch as the red light scars start to resemble kinds of hieroglyphs. Do you remember where the hieroglyphs were? They were on the keepers. Danny and Nick seem to realize at the exact same moment that it's a keeper. And oh my God, they made a keeper. And it is coming to life right now, right here. And they start to run. Nick picks up Emily and the two men start to sprint. The keeper is getting up, and as it does, the ground around it is literally falling apart. It wants out of the cavern, and it is going to break its way out. The two men run faster than they ever thought they could. At one point, Danny grabs Emily from Nick, and then a while later, Nick takes Emily back. They push themselves harder and harder, and then Nick realizes he's wet. The black water is filling the tunnel. He manages to keep Emily out of it and get her to Danny. Nick screams that they need to get higher to higher ground, and Danny yells back that a rise is coming, and they just have to keep running. As Nick manages to get past the water, Danny grabs Emily from Nick. They just have to stay ahead of the water and get to the exit, which they think they can see up ahead. Danny is running out of energy. Nick grabs Emily back. Danny runs up ahead and yells, "There's a breeze." They're actually close. Nick bursts out of the cave with Emily in his arms and then tosses her ahead of him as he slips in the water, gathering at his feet. He yells to her to stay away from the water as he feels his body begin to turn numb from the effects of the black sludge. Just before falling into his own blackness, Danny hauls him out of the water, both men panting for breath. Nick closes his eyes to try to get the stars to pass. When he opens them again, he doesn't know how much time has passed, but he does know he's in the open air. In an inky blackness, but open air. They are no longer underground. He asks Danny where they are, and he said they've made it to the other island. They survey the area. They see a beach. They see the remains of a campfire. They see remains of campfires. They see what Emily describes as giant anthills. Danny doesn't know what they are, but he does know it means that they are not alone. Nick checks in with Emily, who says it was really scary down there and wonders what that thing was doing down there. And Nick says he thinks it was being born. Then Emily asks Nick where her house is, where her mommy is, and why she is in this awful place. It's heartbreaking. But Nick doesn't get a chance to answer because of a thunderous squeal from the forest on this island, and Danny declares that he thinks they have found the pig. They decide to head for the beach and the campfires to try to assess this island to form a plan. Running directly towards the pig would just get them killed. Nick wonders what would happen if they just let it die. But Danny insists some things don't die. They just get meaner. Which is one of the most terrifying lines of both of these books. Some things don't die. They just get meaner. As they get closer to the beach, they start to see that there's a keeper offshore. So they switch their direction and head towards the mounds that Emily was calling giant anthills. They're crossing grassland in the open, and Nick feels so vulnerable. They approach one of the anthills, and Emily goes to investigate. She says, "It's a chimney, so the smoke can get out." The three of them are looking at it when a sound, no, not a sound, a voice comes from the mound. And the voice says, "We mean you no harm." Danny demands that whatever it is come out and show itself. And an animated blob of mud comes forward. It has stumpy arms that it holds in a defensive position. It has large round eyes and a large mouth that oozes with brown goo. And it slides across the ground. And it's rather grotesque. When Nick and Danny ask what they are, the leader answers, "We are a mistake and nothing else." He introduces himself as Yurt. There are about 30 of them or so. They come in different shapes and sizes, just like humans. Some are much smaller, and they seem to stay close to the bigger ones, just like human children. Yurt tells the three humans that they're scared of them because they haven't seen their kind in so very long. Danny asks what that means. Yurt returns with a question. Are they not the chosen species that God created and gave Earth to? Something then occurs to Nick, and he says he needs a moment to talk to his friend. Nick tells Danny, "I think I misheard Ramiel. I don't think he said mudman. I think he said mudmen. And this must be them." Nick and Danny return to the conversation with Yurt. Yurt explains that they are the first race. They are God's first attempt at life. Danny is shocked, and Yurt tells him that they do not need to be reminded of their grotesqueness. They know that they were a failed attempt. They know that they were a mistake in so many ways. And then God just decided to cast them out. He sent them here, and then Nick realizes, have you been here since your creation? Yes. Yes, we have. And their existence up to this point has been fine. They were aware of the Black Farm, but didn't interact with it. Every once in a while, a keeper would pass in the distance, but that's it. But now, the pig has come to their part of the island, and they have been trying to keep away from it ever since. The fires on the beach are there to ward off the keepers that had their way, and the mounds are temporary habitats for them to live in while in a safe part of the island, away from the pig. They explain that the pig is sick, and it needs something they have. When Nick asked if they had been there since their creation, he hit on something very important. They are immortal. God forgot to make them mortal, so they've always been here. The pig wants to find them and consume them so that their immortality will cure his poisonous disease. It takes convincing, but Danny gets Nick to agree that they need to get the pig to these creatures. Nick doesn't want to hurt them. They're pathetic, but they have lives and they care for each other. But Danny is clear that this is the only way. So Danny leaves to go get the pig. Nick tells the Mudmen that Danny is just going to go check on some of the fires by the beach because they saw a keeper earlier that day and we just want to make sure we're safe. When the Mudmen want to move on because they can tell it's no longer safe where they are, Nick asks them to please wait a little more for Danny. Just wait a little longer. But after they wait a little longer, he tells them that they're going to wait. And then eventually punches Yurt in the eye, destroying it. Orange goo to add of the brown goo. So the Mudmen don't leave. The problem is that when Danny and Nick were discussing what they needed to do, Emily was with Yurt and the other Mudmen, who were kind and caring, and they listened to the stories the young child told, and they gave her their attention, and they were nice to her. So when Nick was mean to them, it made her really, really upset. Stop using mean words. Don't be mean to them. They're good and nice. It is heartbreaking. I know I say heartbreaking a lot, but when it comes to Emily, there's so much that's heartbreaking in this story. As the scene unfolds, sounds are emanating from the forest, and Danny bursts forward. He yells to Nick that the pig is coming, and it is not how he remembers it. The pig has evolved. The Mudmen begin to run, but their sluggish bodies don't move well or quickly. Nick can see that they will not escape the violence headed for them. Nick grabs Emily, runs towards Danny, and then he sees it. First, the pig is enormous. It stands at least 100 feet tall. And when it rears up on its hind legs, Nick can see that it has a thin torso that is covered in legs ending in hooves, and it resembles a kind of wicked centipede. The lower part of the pig is huge with muscles and strength, and the hooves it runs on are the size of cars. Its teeth are described as man-sized. The three humans manage to fall behind a sand dune, lay on their stomachs to stay out of view, but are still able to see what is unfolding. The pig then eats all of the Mudmen. Emily is screaming that they tricked their friends. She's horrified. She buries her head into Danny's side. Two men are amazed at how quickly it consumes all of the Mudmen. Then they watch the pig rear up and begin to vomit a great torrent of black, oozing slime. Once it's done, it shook, made a sound like a cannon shot, stretched toward the sky, and looked at the three humans. It stood up into an aggressive stance and then slammed its head into the ground. It began to dig furiously until it was gone from the second island. For a few minutes, none of the humans move. Finally, Emily asks, "Is it gone?" Danny assures her that it is. Emily then asks where her new friends are, and Danny says they're gone too. Nick and Danny look at each other. Danny says that he thinks the pig has gone back to the farm. Then he says, no, he can feel the pig is better, stronger, and Danny knows it's returning to the farm. Nick feels a tinge of hope and asks, have we done it? Have we set things right? Danny says the only way to be sure is to return to the Black Farm, and Nick wonders if the new tunnel the pig created will be an easier trespass. But Danny says there's a much easier way. They can let the clouds do the hard work for them. He's suggesting that they unalive themselves and let the clouds choke them out again. Danny says it's the only way he can be sure to get back to the pig fast enough to get his position at his side back. Nick argues, no, if we do that, we'll be separated. What will happen to Emily? But Danny is over it. He says, if you want to walk, go ahead. While the two men are talking, Emily interrupts and tells Nick that he is a bad, mean man, and she doesn't want to be with a mean man. She says she wants to stay with Danny, but Danny tells her she can't. Nick explains to her that he knows that she doesn't like him anymore, and that she might not think of him as her friend anymore, but that he will continue to keep her safe. He will protect her until they get back to the Black Farm. Danny suggests leaving her on this quiet, small island, but Nick refuses to leave her. Danny then heads into the forest to unalive himself and be spit back out on the Black Farm. Nick and Emily head into the newly formed tunnel. At first, Emily doesn't want to hold Nick's hand, but eventually she does grab a hold of him. She's not happy about being carried by him, but allows it when the exhaustion is just too much. While in the tunnel, both of them suffer the effects of being underground. There is despair, there's sadness, there's a darkness that takes over. This is the point in the story where Nick's thoughts get to him. What is he going to do? How does he continue with the new things that he's done? How will he ever be able to be a good husband and a good father when he gets back? And what about Emily? What is he going to do with her? The hollow feeling inside him seems to get larger and larger, and they walk for what feels like way too long. But when they finally come out on the other side, they can feel the sadness and despair begin to fall off of them. They came out of the tunnel and into the rain on the same side of the island as the barn, and the pig can clearly be seen. It's standing a few miles away in front of the barn, but the ground begins to rumble beneath Nick and Emily. They look off towards the rumbling thunder and see that it's Berserker. The two run for the forest as fast as they can, Nick knowing that whatever is coming, they do not want to be there for it. And this is when what I think you can refer to as the big boss battle happens. For those who are non-gamers out there, that is a big fight between the most powerful characters. At first, Berserker has the upper hand. He punches the pig in the face, and then when the two struggle to stay on their feet, the keeper kicks the pig in the face, teeth fly from its mouth, the two mammoth creatures start circling each other, each looking for a way to attack. The pig takes an opportunity to stomp on the keeper's chest, then the pig winds up for another blow, but Berserker gets out of the way at the last minute and hits the pig with both fists, and that's when lightning flashes across the sky, and Berserker reaches up one of his giant arms into the sky, and lightning engulfs the mammoth, so the pig takes a punch full on his face with an arm full of lightning. When Nick's eyes clear, he can see that the pig is on the ground and Berserker is looming over it. Nick grabs Emily to run away from the violence, but they continue to watch. Berserker is circling the pig. The pig is oozing orange goo from its eyes and black slime from its mouth. It struggles to its feet, and Berserker gives it the time to do so. It is clear who the victor will be. When Berserker goes in for what Nick thinks will be the final hit, the pig counters and knocks the keeper to the ground, and then it begins to vomit all over Berserker, and the rock formation that makes up the keeper begins to soften. It's as if the vomit from the pig is a poison to Berserker. It is a disgusting scene, and as the keeper struggles and screams and begins to melt, it tries to continue to fight, but it can't. Finally, the pig is done vomiting. It opens its massive jaw, bites the keeper's head, and with a yank removes it and throws it away from the monster's body. There is a triumphant scream of victory. The pig-born begin to exit the barn, looking up at their god with reverence and wonder. A group of unalivers slink back into the forest, and Nick and Emily head that way as well. Emily pleads with Nick to take her home. She says that she doesn't like it here. Everyone is mean, everyone is loud, everything is scary. She wants Nick to take her home, to bring her back to her mommy. Nick says that he also wants to go home. and he tells her he thinks they're getting closer. But before they can really assess the situation, Nick gets punched in the face, all knuckles. He gets hit again and then hears, "I've been looking for you." It's Peter, which is the last thing Nick realizes before losing consciousness. When he comes to, he knows he's in a bad place. Peter is standing in front of a group of unalivers. One of them says that he thinks Nick is waking up. Peter is pleased. He announces to the group that this is the man who destroyed their temple. This is the man who ruined the pig. This is the man who is responsible for every terrible thing happening to them. He announces that Nick deserves pain, that they can beat him, cut him, bleed him, R-word him until his vocal cords rupture. But while physical violence is awful, it is far worse when you have to watch it happening to someone you love. And this is where the story gets almost too upsetting even for me, because they bring out Emily on a leash. She sees Nick and begs that he save her, but Peter tells her that Nick is all the reason that all of this is happening to her, and that Nick is the one who told them to do what they're going to do. Then he rips off the 4-year-old's clothes and throws her to the ground. Emily shivers into the fetal position, and Nick is screaming for them to stop. Peter then asks Nick if he's ever witnessed a breaking. And of course he has. You have too. When Nick and Danny were locked up after the fighting pits, the man who wouldn't fight was brought in and broken. Well, that's what they're going to do to Emily. It is a terrible scene. Peter tells Emily over and over and over that Nick is the one who told them to do this to her, that Nick is the one who is responsible for what she's going through, and Emily is yelling and screaming to Nick to help save her and do something he promised to keep her safe. But Nick is tied up and can't do anything except yell back at her that it's not true, that she needs to just close her eyes and it will all be over soon. They do to her what was done to the man back at the pits. They break her limbs one at a time, finishing by destroying her skull, and it's horrifying and it is torture for Nick. Peter then says, it's finally Nick's turn to be broken. And that's when they hear something in the distance. It's Danny, followed by a horde of pigborn, and they couldn't show up in time to save Emily? Sorry. When Peter sees that it's Danny followed by the pigborn, a bit of the fire goes out of Peter's eyes. Danny announces that the pig is back, and the pigborn are hungry. Peter tries to argue, we have no problem with you. Just leave us alone. But Danny says, as soon as I could, I got myself right back into the number 2 spot under the pig and told it about these ex-cultists. It was agreed that they needed to be dealt with. When Peter accuses Danny of being loyal to the pigborn, Danny absolutely agrees. Yes, he is far more loyal to the pigborn who have to do as he says. Then he reminds the unalivers gathered that the pig is back, that the black farm is going to tip back to the way it was, and then Danny announces that this little group is now ended. And then he yells, get them. It is described as if the ex-cultists are put through a paper shredder. Peter runs to the forest, others try to get away as well, but the pigborn attack viciously. Danny then finds Nick. He says, I leave you for a few hours and this is what happens? But Nick isn't in the mood. He tells Danny that they killed Emily. They killed her slowly and painfully, and Danny is actually sorry. He unties Nick, who falls to the ground. Nick gets up, grabs the sledgehammer that Peter had dropped after using it on Emily, and heads towards the forest yelling, I have to get Peter. As Nick runs towards Peter, his mind goes back to Emily, how she pleaded with him, how she was broken, how there was no way that Nick can leave the black farm and leave Emily behind. He then spots Peter up ahead. He also sees a keeper returning to the black water of the ocean. Another sign the farm is returning to the way it was. Nick makes it to Peter and tackles him. Nick screams at Peter, what kind of a man does that to an innocent child? Peter responds that Nick knows exactly what the farm is and how it changes people. Then he hypothesizes that he's just a pawn in the grand scheme of things. I mean, he was only sent to punish Nick. Nick responds violently, hurting Peter pretty badly. Nick has the upper hand and tells Peter he would like to take his time destroying Peter the way he destroyed Emily, but he just doesn't have the patience. Peter tries to argue, but Nick caves in his head. He didn't mind that part. Once Peter's body dissipates into nothing and Nick's mind returns fully to Emily. "Where are you, little one?" he mutters. Then he thinks about everything he has done this time on the farm and reminds himself that he did it for Jess and for Theo. And he realizes he won't ever be able to find happiness back on Earth if he has to leave Emily on the farm. He's in the midst of this mental anguish when a voice says to him, "Having a bad day?" It's Ramiel. The two begin to argue. Nick calls him an SOB, and Ramiel tells him to calm down. Things on the farm are finally settling. He tells Nick that the pig has returned and that even the out-of-control keeper was destroyed. He says it's been determined that the loss of the Mudmen was worth getting the Black Farm back online, so to speak. Nick is horrified at how cavalier Ramiel is about the hell that he's gone through. Nick then brings up Emily. He says that while on the Black Farm this time, he has spent a great deal of his time taking care of a 4-year-old child. A child that should not be on the farm. How could the being that made all of this, that think that punishing a 4-year-old for something she could not understand is in any way okay? Ramiel tries to explain that rules are rules, but Nick doesn't want to hear it. He tells Ramiel that this isn't over until Emily is no longer stuck in the Black Farm. Ramiel tries to tell Nick that he has no leverage here when a third voice is heard. It's Danny. Ramiel wants to know why Nick thinks he has any power to save Emily. Nick responds that he knows what he has done is terrible. He's done murderous things, and he did them to save his family and to return to his family. And while he hates what he's had to do, he would do it again for the same results. And in doing so, he has realized something. He has no guilt. And that is what pisses off Ramiel. Nick is not guilty about what he's had to do because he knows his motivation to keep Jess safe, to return to Jess and Theo, and even protecting Emily were all the right thing to do. And he will not be leaving the Black Farm without Emily. Ramiel then points out he can't do what Nick asked. There's only one, for lack of a better word, person that can do what Nick wants, and Ramiel is not him. Nick then laughs at the idea of praying to your God. But Ramiel reminds him that God is very much real. Nick clarifies, he knows God is real. He just thinks he's a self-serving, effing C-word. And at this point, I agree. Ramiel tells Nick that taking Emily isn't something he can do. And Nick says, then who do I have to talk to? It's obvious, right? Only the big guy. Nick demands that Ramiel take him to God, but Ramiel says no. He holds out his hand to Nick so that he can take Nick back to Earth and his family. And Nick says no. Then he attacks Ramiel. First, he breaks his nose. Then Nick jumps onto Ramiel and continues his attack. Danny is surprised and amused. Nick takes a bite out of Ramiel's neck and then shoves his thumbs into the angel's eyes. He tells Ramiel it didn't need to get this nasty. Just before the angel yells that he can no longer see. Eventually, Ramiel yells, okay, I'll take you to him. Just no more violence. Nick then gets up off of Ramiel and says, see how much easier this could have been? Danny asks Nick to tell the big man to eat shit. Then Ramiel takes his hand, and they're gone. They fly over a dark lake, and Nick is deposited at the bottom of a small hill. Ramiel tells Nick he got what he wanted. Nick asks what's at the top of the hill, and he is told a cabin and something that is more than a man. Nick and Ramiel exchange violent words of hate, and then Nick begins to climb the hill. As he climbs, he has time to listen to his mind. He thinks about how he's so close to being back to Jess and Theo, and how Jess would want him to make sure that Emily was protected. He knows that for sure. When he reaches the cabin, he's greeted by a man who is sitting in a rocking chair at the end of the cabin's porch. His feet are crossed and propped up on the railing, and there's a pipe in his mouth. He tells Nick he didn't have to come all this way to talk to him, and Nick laughs at the idea of prayer. Then he says he's really more of a face-to-face kind of guy. God then agrees. Yes, you are. The two have quite a conversation then. Nick begins by asking, why the Black Farm? Why send people who have self-exited to that horrible place? These are people at their lowest point, at times when they need compassion more than anything else, and you send them to a place that is so close to hell it's often confused as such? God says that the Black Farm is the only afterlife where free will is still an option, and that is a gift. Nick finds that to be horribly, incredibly insulting. Finally, God gets Nick to understand that he did not need to set things right in the farm. Why would he need Nick for that? Then Nick has a moment of memory and asks if they've met before. God then points to the eye patch he's wearing and says, you did this to me. He reminds Nick that the last time he was on the farm, he ate an angel. Nick says he had to. And God agrees, yes, it was a very clever way for you to get your life back. But the eyes of the world were manifestations of me, of God. And when Nick ate the angel, he destroyed God's eye, an injury that cannot be healed, ever. So Nick's return to the farm was a punishment. He had to come back and suffer the farm again to make amends for what he did to get out the first time. Nick is livid. Then he realizes that God couldn't wait for him to die because Nick's morality is good. He's done bad things, but he's done them all for righteous reasons. He knows that he, Nick, would not have gone to hell to suffer after death. So this was the only way for God to punish him. So here's where the argument turns to Emily. Nick tells God he knows that Emily does not deserve to deal with the Black Farm for all eternity, but God argues the same stupid argument. The rules are what the rules are, and nothing can be done to change that. Nick says he doesn't believe that to be true. God then says that all actions have consequences. There is a way for Emily to return to her life on Earth, and Nick says, whatever it takes. It is agreed that both Emily and Nick will return. And just as Nick is transported, he hears God say, hell's never that far away, Nick. When Nick is finally able to open his eyes, he is shocked at what he sees. It's his house. He gets up, he runs to the door, and he begins knocking. I'm home, Jess, I'm home. Please open the door, I'm home, Jess. But it isn't Jess who opens the door. It's a man, about Nick's age, and he wants to know why Nick is banging on his door in the middle of the night. Nick asks the strange man why he's in Nick's house, but the man says, what are you talking about? I have lived in this house my entire life. Then Nick steps into the light, and the man inside the house gasps and asks, Dad? The man that answered the door, who is now about Nick's age, is Theo. Nick can see it as soon as he hears the word Dad. Sobs escape him as he wraps his grown son in his arms. He doesn't understand, but he hugs the man with love. When he pulls away to look at Theo, he's still sobbing. Where's Jess? Where's your mom? But Theo is still so confused. How is Nick here? And why does he look the same age as Theo? Nick says he knows it's confusing, but he really needs to see Jess. Theo's mom will help explain everything. But Theo's face falls. I'm sorry, Dad. Mom died 3 years ago. Remember when God said that actions have consequences? From behind Theo, Nick hears the voice of a woman. Theo? Is everything okay? When Theo steps aside so that Nick can see the woman and the woman can see him, she begins to scream. Nick looks at her and is shocked. Emily? And she's screaming how it was a nightmare. It wasn't real. You can't be here. You can't be real. It didn't happen. It was a nightmare. Nick turns to run, trips over his own feet, and hits his head on the pavement. Theo takes Emily back to their bedroom, settles Nick on the living room couch, but Nick doesn't regain consciousness for a couple hours. When he wakes, Emily has calmed down, and Theo has questions. First things first, he says that he and Emily have been together for a few years, married for about a year, and he loves her more than anything. He says he knows he can't understand what has happened, but when Nick confirms that he and Emily do know each other, Theo needs to know if Nick ever harmed her. Nick responds, "No, I would never do anything to hurt that girl." Theo believes him. Nick tries to explain that he died, that he went to a really bad place, and when he was there, he found Emily. The reason it took him so long to get back was because he did what he did to make sure that Emily would be safe. Nick won't tell Theo about the horrors that Emily had to suffer. That's her information to share, if ever. The next morning, Theo offers to take Nick to visit Jess's grave. The three go together. Emily is starting to understand that Nick is not the enemy. Her memories are hazy, she says, and years of therapy have convinced her that her time on the Black Farm was actually a recurring nightmare. She isn't completely comfortable with Nick, but she does understand that he saved her. So they go to the cemetery, where Nick sees that Jess is buried right next to him. They did a funeral for both. There was no reason to think Nick would ever come back. Theo says that it only seemed right that they be buried next to each other. Theo tells Nick that his mom spent his whole life telling him stories about what a wonderful man Nick was, and how the two of them laughed together so very much. Then Theo gives Nick a sealed envelope that he says his mother gave him to give to Nick if he ever returned. Then he says he'll let his father be alone. But Nick is hit with this moment of severe pain. It passes, but you can tell he's in terrible pain. Emily comes up to him. "Are you sure you're all right, Nick?" The sound of his name coming from her voice hits him hard. Then she tells him that she doesn't want to, but she remembers most of her time on the farm. Nick has a bunch of these moments of extreme pain that pass quickly, but they sort of come not often, but he experiences it far more than once. And Emily asks if the pain that he keeps feeling is because of her. He tells her he doesn't know, but that if it is, it was worth it. He had to hurt somebody to be able to get Emily pardoned from the farm, and it was worth it. Emily then tells him the most wonderful thing that you can tell a parent, that Theo is a wonderful man who is easy to love. Finally, she thanks him for saving her, and then she says that she's going to go find her husband. Nick opens the envelope, and he finds the note that he left Jess all those years ago. No, I can't read it to you. I won't make it through. But I will read to you. Below the note, in Jess's handwriting, "Wherever you are, I hope you'll find me again, my love. And know that wherever I am, my heart remains with you." Much like I just did, Nick swallows a sob, thinks about how much he misses his wife, and the book ends. If you are still here, I thank you so much for staying through all of this. If you enjoyed, leave a like or a comment. It's really helpful. I'd love it if you subscribed. And one last thing before I go, please be kind to yourself. You are precious and important. I will catch you next time. Nick bursts out of the cave. When Berserker goes in for what Nick will think be. He explains that the pig began at a group of unalizer who is now emotionally attached to fictional characters. Let me pull myself together here. I have to get my shit together. Hold on. This is why it took me so long to make this video, because I knew that this is what was going to happen. I can do this. Okay. All those years ago,